Welcome to the Zoom host training. Today we're going to cover a few topics. One, setting up your space when hosting a Zoom meeting, how to set up your Zoom profile, Zoom account settings, in-meeting controls, and meeting etiquette. Before we jump into using the Zoom software, I want to point out a few things. It's best if you can host a Zoom meeting or attend a Zoom meeting from a quiet location. If you're sharing your video, we recommend that you face a window or a light, avoiding backlight. And when possible, either connect to an internet router or sit next to or close to the internet source within your home. This will help with better streaming quality. In terms of what type of device you use, especially when hosting, it's recommended that you use a desktop or a laptop, as the Zoom application offers more features for a host. When possible, try to use a device with a web camera so we can see each other. And if you're in a noisy environment, we recommend you use headphones. If it's really noisy, headphones with a noise canceling microphone so that meeting attendees hear you and not everything else going on. In terms of setting up the software on your device, you'll need to download the Zoom app, which you can find on the internet or on an app store. Make sure your Zoom application and operating systems are kept up to date to avoid any incompatibilities. Also, when hosting a Zoom meeting, do your best to minimize the number of applications open that are running on your device. This will also help create a better Zoom experience for you and attendees. We're going to cover in detail setting up your online profile found here on the Zoom website, configuring your meeting settings so that when you use the application to launch Zoom meetings and host Zoom meetings, they start with the settings that best meet your need. Let's jump into setting up your profile. Here we have my profile. While there's a lot to cover online, we're only going to cover a few sections. We recommend to all members, if possible, upload a picture. This will make it so that during a Zoom meeting, people can associate a face with a name. Also, using the application is easier in terms of scheduling meetings, putting meetings on your calendar, and sending invites. If you connect the Zoom application to your email and down here to your calendar, as you see I've done. If you navigate here to the menu settings, we're now going to run through these details. The first is the security section, which starts with the waiting room. If you're hosting meetings with groups, small or large, it's recommended that you turn off the waiting room so that as you present and people come into the meeting, you don't have to individually admit them one at a time. Toggling the settings here on and off on the website will make it so that every time you launch a meeting, these settings are the default. You will always have the option in the application to switch on and off many of these settings. If you're hosting a lot of meetings that are one-on-ones or interviews where you don't want people just simply joining the meeting it's best to then turn on the waiting room so that you can control who joins and when. I recommend setting a meeting passcode. This will prevent anyone from accidentally joining your meeting where you didn't send someone the Zoom ID. I have had scenarios where people have joined into meetings because they had typed in a misnumber, just like when sometimes people call the wrong phone number. A digit could be off from the meeting that they had, and it sends them to your meeting, and you may not know who they are. So turning on the meeting passcode can prevent this from happening. Now, turning that on also means people have to type in the passcode unless you toggle in um, this setting right here, embed passcode in invite for one click join. This will produce a link for your meeting, whether you grab that manually or schedule a meeting and send that. We'll cover that in a little bit. It'll make it so that individuals do not have to type in a password. They can just click the link and the password is embedded, which makes it easier to join. There are some additional settings here looking at meeting authentication, again, how people can join. Um, I tend to make it so that users from a phone do not have to type in a passcode. Some of these settings you may not need to worry about. In terms of when you schedule a meeting, you can set when you and participants join the meeting, how the audio works and how the video works. I recommend you always start with host video on, but leave participant video off. That way, when they join, they're not surprised with their camera on. Sometimes people aren't in the best locations. And if you want to do a camera on meeting, which I always recommend, best to ask the participants in the meeting to turn their video on instead of having that auto turn on when they join. They will have the option, of course, to turn that on or off before they join. I also recommend that the audio type setting is set to telephone and computer audio. If it's set to just computer audio, they have to join via a computer or smart device to be able to have audio connection. Whereas if you have telephone and computer audio, for those that might be not connected to the internet, but able to call in, they'll have that option with their telephone. Here's the setting to allow your meeting participants to join before you do. And there's a few options. They can join at any time before your meeting, 5 minutes prior, 10 minutes prior, or 15 minutes prior. If you toggle this off, the meeting will not activate until you, the host, first start. I recommend allowing them to join 5 minutes before the start meeting time. This next section around personal meeting IDs, these three options here, creating one or enabling it, using that personal ID when scheduling a meeting, and using that personal ID when starting an instant meeting make a big difference in how you host your Zoom meetings. I recommend everyone turn on Enable Personal Meeting ID. This will give you something similar to a phone number, a 9 to 11 digit number that is assigned to your Zoom account. What this means is you can use the same meeting ID, the same Zoom link, every time you host a meeting. Turning this on does not enable that feature, though. It just gives you the personal meeting ID. Here is where you can toggle on, when I schedule a meeting, do I want my personal ID used every time? Or when I start an instant meeting, start now, do I want it to use that same meeting ID? There's a few scenarios where it makes sense to use these options on or off. If you're hosting a lot of different types of meetings with a lot of different groups, you probably don't want to schedule a meeting with the same ID every time. This means that anyone who has that ID could join any of the meetings. Whereas if you have this toggled off, use personal meeting ID when scheduling a meeting. Individual meetings will have their own links. If you're looking to host a consistent meeting, let's say it is a youth activity every week or a Sunday school activity every other week, you may consider using your personal meeting ID so that you don't have to produce a new link every time you host that meeting. This was actually recommended by the Sunday school president, that for those hosting regular Sunday school classes, we use personal meeting IDs so that one link can be created and used over and over for each class. Be careful to not use the same meeting ID at the same time. That would be the same as putting all participants for multiple meetings in one room. Down here, we have mute all participants when they join a meeting. I recommend turning that on. So the default is they're quiet when they join. You can also toggle upcoming meeting reminder. This will only display for you, the host, and not for the participants. Next, we look at in-meeting basics. I recommend you toggle on the chat feature. This will give a chat option so that people during the meeting have the ability to chat if it's not appropriate for them to unmute, and they can still participate. Private chat gives the meeting participants the ability to directly chat one another instead of chatting to the whole room. I typically leave this on, but you may want to consider toggling this off with certain groups. For example, you might have a youth group that you want anyone who is chatting to be talking to the whole room and not have the equivalent of a bunch of whisper conversations going on. Sometimes it's appropriate, and my default is to have auto-saving chats turned on. So if there's comments made, if there's questions asked after the meeting as the host, I will get a text file of all chat conversations that were had during the meeting. And this gives me the ability to go back and look at questions that maybe didn't get answered so I can answer them after the meeting. I've turned off sound notification when someone joins or leaves to avoid the distraction. You can turn on or off the ability for people in the meeting to provide files. This works in the chat menu. So in addition to people writing messages, they could also share a picture or upload another type of file that other participants can see. These next two options around feedback to Zoom and end of meeting experience survey, I've toggled off. These are features that, when turned on, present surveys and the option for meeting participants to send feedback to Zoom, the company. Here you can toggle on and set whether by default co-hosts are allowed or not. Here you can turn on the feature for polling. This is a paid feature, and you won't have this option unless you have a paid account. These options here always show meeting control bar, is how you can see my control bar here. Probably don't need that on, but I turned it on for this training. And show Zoom windows during screen share. Probably would turn that off so that your Zoom meetings aren't over the top your Zoom screens are not over the top of the content you're sharing. Again, for the purpose of this training, I turned it on. Here you can turn on or off whether individuals in the meeting have the ability to share screen. I have it set that people can share their screen and all participants can. However, if someone's sharing, me, the host, always has the ability to take that back. And that's this setting right here. The annotation tools, while most people don't use, allow those who are sharing their screen, and I will do that now, to annotate, and they can then write text over the screen. They can turn on a spotlight feature, which I will do now. So you can see my mouse is more visible now with a red dot. And it can make it easier if you're trying to put information on the screen and allow people to interact with that information. Like maybe I want to point out this draw feature right here, and it will allow me to come in and I can circle something. This is used more in a classroom setting than a typical Sunday school type setting. We'll go ahead and clear all that. The whiteboard, again, is a standard feature, should be included with every account, and it gives you the ability to create a whiteboard. So rather than having a screen like we have here, it creates kind of a white screen in which you can use the annotate features to draw, text, interact with, etc. Non-verbal feedback. This gives you the ability when toggled so that participants during the meeting can select certain options like thumbs up, thumbs down, hands clapping, etc. This also applies with meeting reactions. I suggest turning both of those features on so it gives other participants different ways to communicate and react to what's going on in the meeting. This is especially important with the youth because there's some fun options. Here, if a participant was removed and you remove them from a meeting, you can make it so that they cannot rejoin. Here you toggle on the option for participants to be able to rename themselves, which I recommend as many households are sharing the same Zoom account. Here is the option for hiding participants' profile pictures in a meeting. By default, I leave this on. I know in a education setting, some teachers and classrooms turn this off because students may or may not have appropriate profile pictures. I don't think that's a challenge we're going to have. Report to Zoom, if enabled, gives meeting participants the ability to report inappropriate behavior, but that goes to Zoom, the company. I don't turn this on. Here you have the option for breakout rooms. This is also a paid service. You will not have this unless you have a paid for account. So I won't cover that at this time. Remote support turns on a feature where you can call Zoom, the company, into your meeting and try to get support. It also gives the ability for, excuse me, that's not correct. It gives the ability for the meeting host to provide one-to-one support during a meeting to other participants. I typically don't turn this on because as the host, I'm generally presenting. Closed captioning and saved captions apply more to settings where you're looking to enable third-party features that can take the audio, like what I'm speaking right now, and transcribe it on the bottom of the screen into text in real time. You would need a paid account as well as a paid third-party service to enable this feature and use it completely. They're rather expensive. I looked into this a little bit, realizing that sometimes it's hard for people to hear, and if they could read what was being said in real time, that might be an advantage. Services cost anywhere from $20 to $40 a month, and you would need that per account. Here we get into some of the video settings. I've enabled high definition video. The challenge here is that it can use more bandwidth. If you have a high-speed internet connection at your house, I'd recommend at least 30 megabytes or higher. You may consider turning this feature on. This can create delays or lag in Zoom. If you experience that, I recommend turning it off. Here we have the ability for individuals, yourself and those in the meeting, to select virtual backgrounds. These are images that will show up behind them. Sometimes this is appropriate if they're in a busy setting where there's a lot of movement or activity that can be distracting. It'll basically create an outline of you, the presenter, with a still image, or some of these are animated, as you can see the camera icon, in the background. I know sometimes I've seen people use this at work because they may be taking a Zoom meeting from a room or from a dirty space, and it's one way to clean things up really quickly. Video filters is a newer feature. If you have the most updated version of Zoom, it gives you the ability to add fun animations. We'll cover this later. I'm going to skip over these other ones, as I think most of us won't need to use these. I will call out show a join from your browser link. What this is talking about, it gives individuals that you send the meeting to the ability to join the meeting without having to have the Zoom application. With this toggled off, everyone has to have a Zoom account before joining your meeting. With this toggled on, they can simply join from their internet browser without the need to download and set up the app. Email notifications. I've toggled on to get an email notification when attendees join meeting before a host. If you remember, there was a setting up above where we could set to allow participants to join before the host. I have mine set for 5 minutes. I typically try to join before 5 minutes, but sometimes I like a reminder to see if someone joined before I did, and that's a reminder for me to hurry and hop in the meeting. I also enabled it so that hosts and participants are automatically notified via email when a meeting is canceled. That way, if I cancel a meeting, I don't also have to remember to send out an email. That covers it for what I plan to cover in the section for setting up your Zoom profile and setting up your Zoom settings. One other thing I will cover under settings is this telephone option. Have you ever received a Zoom invite where you saw a big list of international calling numbers? If this setting is turned on, which by default it is, then when you create an invitation from Zoom, it assumes you might be sending that invite to an international audience, and a whole bunch of phone numbers get included, which I find can be confusing sometimes. So I toggle that off so that in the setting that we have here with the ward, I'm not sending out how to connect from other countries. Here I also toggled, and the default should be the United States, where most people are calling from. And what this does is it allows it so that When your call is connected to the Zoom servers or the Zoom cloud, it uses servers within the United States as opposed to other countries, which should make your call quality better. So with that, I'm not going to cover the meeting section. That's because we'll see that in the application or the webinars, as most of us don't use them. And here you can also see your recordings that you've recorded of Zoom meetings. But you can also see all that within the application. So let's jump over there. So here I have the Zoom application. I'm going to run across some of the features here at the bottom and explain how they work. This part of the training should be helpful for those who are not just meeting hosts, but also those who are participants. To mute your mic, select the microphone button. Selecting again unmutes it. If for some reason, when you're talking, you don't see this volume gauge jumping up and down on the microphone, it may be that you have the wrong microphone selected. By clicking on this arrow, you have the option to come in and select which microphone you're using, which speaker you're listening through, as well as test those connections. The same thing applies with the video. Selecting Start Video will toggle your camera on and off. Selecting the chevron, you can toggle between different cameras. You can also select and choose a video background. We'll take a peek at that now. Hi, it's 11:30 at night, so I may not look my best. So here I can come through and I can toggle on different backgrounds. I'm now at the Golden Gate Bridge, or I took a screenshot of the church. I can be here. You can upload different images, and sometimes this is fun. I know I always have kids running in the background, which can be distracting, so I often use some of these images. For video filters, these provide some fun things that I recommend potentially when working with the youth, as it adds animations that work with you, the character. The security setting will show up for meeting hosts. Here you have some of those same controls that you had when setting up your profile. My share screen, my chat option, the ability for people to rename themselves, unmute themselves, start their video, or annotate on a shared screen. However you set up your profile online will determine how these load every time you open up a new meeting. If you find that you're constantly coming in and having to change some of these settings, that's an indication that you should go back online and set the default to whatever works best for you. Toggling on participants allows us to see everyone in the meeting. It also gives us some of those other engagement features. I can say yes, no, slow down, go faster, thumbs up, applause, I need a break, or I've stepped away. If you click on the up arrow, let's say you're in a meeting and somebody needs to join and the link isn't working, or they need the link, or on the fly you want to invite somebody, you can go ahead and click this invite option. Now, a couple of things happen here. You can copy the invite link. This is just going to be the link they click on, no instructions, no information on how to call in. It would just be a link that they would need a computer, an iPad, or a smartphone to use. If you copy invitation, which I will do now, you're going to end up getting quite a bit more, and I'll show you what that looks like. So by copying it, I'm on a Mac. I'm going to hit Command V. That means to paste. I could also hit on a computer Control V, and that would paste it, or you can right click and select paste. But it provides join the meeting. Here is the link and meeting ID and the passcode that I've set. Since I've also connected my email to Zoom, I could come in here and it would connect right to my email with the invitation information. I would just have to type in who I'm sending it to and the subject line. Here we have the chat feature. You can have both participants and chat open at the same time, as you see here on the right-hand side. This is where you could upload the file, send a message, and change the chat settings. Again, I have it so that everyone can speak publicly. But if I wanted it so that people could speak to the whole group and to individuals, I could change that here. Also, you can save the chat if needed. Screen share. I am currently sharing my screen, so I'm not going to turn this one off or you won't see anything that I'm clicking on. But you can toggle here on the chevron, one participant sharing at a time or multiple participants sharing simultaneously. There's also an option for some advanced sharing. This is very similar to what we saw online, where you can decide, am I the only one who can share, or can everyone share? And if everyone can share, can anyone share over the top of anyone else? Or is it just me who can interrupt somebody? I'm going to skip over the polling feature as most of us don't have it. Here is the start stop recording. I'm currently recording, so I'm going to leave that as is. When you start recording, recordings, as soon as a meeting has closed, will automatically download as a audio file and an audio video file directly to your computer. Here we have the option for breakout rooms. I will also skip as most of us do not have it. In addition to engaging in a meeting through some of these options within the participant menu, as I showed before, yes, no, go slower, go faster, we also have the ability to throw up some reactions here, assuming you've turned that on, as I showed online earlier. Hooray. I have a few other features here because I have a paid account and they're showing up in this menu. If a lot of these options aren't showing up, it may have to do with your screen size. As I move this screen size smaller, more and more of my menu options end up in the More tab. So this may look different for different people, depending on the size of their screen and how big their window is. Let's jump back to the presentation. I've covered most of this here, but I want to provide a reminder. What type of meeting are you typically having? If it's a group setting, disable the waiting room. Try to make it as easy as possible for individuals to join, share, and communicate. If you're hosting multiple meetings, you may want to have different meeting IDs for different meetings. On the flip side, if many of your meetings on Zoom are interviews, you want to enable the waiting room so that other individuals who may have received previously meeting links from you don't accidentally join your meeting unannounced. Meeting etiquette. It's best practice to mute yourself when you aren't speaking, just in case any noises come from around you, including if you're the host. Minimizing interruptions, turning off your computer notifications, such as chats, emails, alarms, will keep pop-ups from happening as you host your meeting. If you're in a loud environment, we recommend you wear headphones. One, so you can hear, but also try to get headphones with noise canceling microphones so that only your voice is audible as you talk and engage, and not everything else going on around you. It's obvious we try not to talk over each other, but sometimes with the internet, that's hard. In terms of not talking over each other, maybe consider using the chat, using the raise hand feature, or engaging with some of those reactions, thumbs up, thumbs down, applause, etc. I find it's more easy to not talk over each other if we're sharing video and we're looking at each other while we're talking. When everyone starts to share video, Zoom has to process and send a lot more information from your computer through the internet and others, and can lead to audio or video freezing problems. I want to talk about this for just a minute. We've all experienced this, and I want to talk about how you can determine, is it your computer that's the problem? Is it someone else's computer? Or is it Zoom? Because all of those could be the problem. If you have the meeting up, and I'll give an example, we'll go back to the intro slide, and let's say there's a whole bunch of people that you can see in the Zoom meeting. If everyone freezes and the audio freezes, that's a good indication that it's your internet problem or your computer that's slowed down. If your video is fine and other videos are fine, just the individual who is speaking is frozen or their audio is choppy, that's a good indication that it could be an issue on their end. Like the first example, if everyone's frozen and not just you, but other people are experiencing that same problem, saying, "What was that? I couldn't hear you." It could be that the local internet is the problem or that Zoom is a problem. One way to try to address this issue, if this is becoming disruptive to your class or your meeting, is to have meeting participants turn off their video. Last, being a good host. As a host, it's your responsibility to keep order in the meeting. Have a few rules. Make recommendations on how you'd like people to engage. Feel free to take over screen sharing if necessary. If need be, as the host, you're the only individual who can remove individuals from calls. I've never seen this be necessary, but know that if it ever was, you as a host have that ability. In addition to this video, we'll be sending out an email with this presentation. The presentation has links to several sets of videos that I found online that were helpful in helping me create this training. But there are many more than what I could include, and I recommend going through and watching some of those. It can help as both a participant and a meeting host. I hope this was helpful, and happy holidays.